All right. So welcome again, everyone, to our collaborative webinar series with AgLanta Grown and the University of Georgia Extension Office. We are joined by some great presenters today, excuse me, from the University of Georgia, both Fulton County Extension Office, as well as the Fayette County Fayette County Extension Office. And today we'll be discussing Georgia vegetable crop disease identification. All right, and as we usually do, before we get into our presentations, I'd like to take a moment for some grounding and acknowledgement of the land, territories, practices, and cultures of the indigenous peoples, forcibly removed First Nations, here in our territories, the Muskogee Creek people, the enslaved people of the African diaspora, also the countless immigrants and migrants who largely are the laborers of the current agricultural workforce today. We also want to uplift all people of the global majority, also known as Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, as well as other individuals, groups, populations, and cultures that continue to represent for our just, equitable, inclusive, and anti-racist communities and practices for all of our benefit here in Atlanta and beyond. And we also want to pay respect, gratitude, and support to all humankind and living beings in the intersecting and overlapping social identities and factors such as gender identity, caste, sexual orientation, race, class, religion, disability, physical appearance, and height. And this grounding and acknowledgement was written by our Urban Agriculture Director, J.O. Lubayu, who could not be with us today. And we also want to insert a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., no one is free until we are all free. Additionally, want to show everyone that our Urban Ag and Food Systems team in the city of Atlanta are all real people, real accessible people. And we have two representatives today, myself, Justin Nicholson, as the AgLanta Grown Program Coordinator, as well as Yesenia Maldonado, who's doing a little bit of behind the scenes work. And you see her here as well as the Assistant AgLanta Grown Program Coordinator. Additionally, J.O. Lubayu, who I mentioned, our Urban Agriculture Director. Amina Robinson is our Community Engagement and Outreach Fellow. Whitney Barr, who is our Food Systems Innovation Fellow, as well as Michelle Wiseman, who is the Director of Waste Diversion and Outreach. So that's our team. I would like to stop sharing now and we'll introduce our presenters and our guests. So I'll pass it over to you, James, if you would like to introduce your team.
All right, yeah. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, AgLanta. So we, with the Fulton County Extension tonight, we have myself, James Aaron. I'm one of two agriculture and natural resources agents here in Fulton County. My office is down in East Point. And then Gabrielle Latora is our other agriculture and natural resources agent. Her office is in Sandy Springs. And also out of our Sandy Springs office, we have Norlethea Harris, who's our agriculture and natural resources educator. So please reach out to us if you have questions about today's presentation or other agricultural related issues. And we really thank Kim Toal, Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent and County Extension Coordinator in Fayette County, for presenting tonight.
Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to come and share some information on vegetable diseases. I will, if it's okay, Justin, to go ahead and share my screen, and then we can go ahead and get started. If there are any questions, please feel free to let us know. And as you are out in your farms or in your gardens and you have issues, please take them to the extension offices that we have available in Fulton. If you wanted to come to Fayette, you could go, depending upon where you're joining from, your specific county office, so that way they could help you with some management strategies to move you forward in your gardens. Okay, let me see. So I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. Okay, perfect. So today, or tonight rather, like I said before, we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about some of those common diseases. Now, this is not everything that could be out there. There are some new ones that can come or come up during certain times of the year. Also, too, weather patterns play a big role in whether or not we see a big outbreak or even if we see any. So if it's wet, we may see a little bit more disease development than if it's a little bit drier. So the first thing that you're going to want to do with any kind of pest issue is to go and look for trouble. You want to identify your plants, make sure that you know what you've planted. And I know that may sound kind of ridiculous, but know what kind of plants you have growing out there, what their care is going to be to make sure that you're giving everything that you can to it. Because a healthier plant in the right location is going to be able to withstand some issues at the beginning, and you'll find that moving forward overall, hopefully you'll see that you have a less of a big impact on them as they're growing. Our insects, if you're looking for insects, they're going to typically be underneath the leaves. That's going to be where they're going to hide. And I know that you've already had plenty of presentations in this series, so just keep that in mind. You also too want to note the damage for diseases. Is it going to, what color holes are they? Is there even a coloration in the hole? Sometimes diseases will, the centers will fall out. And so it'll just be a nice little circular hole. And so you may think that it was from an insect when it could have actually been from a disease. You also too want to make sure that you're recording the date, the location, and recent weather. Record keeping is a really great way for you to get a good handle on what is going on in the garden and at what time of the year you're seeing some of these issues develop. So that way, the next growing season, you can say, oh, okay, well, I started to see some of these issues develop around the same time of the year or around the same environmental conditions. And you can kind of be a little bit ahead in that growing season. Sometimes in vegetable gardening, you may be what would be considered like a year behind. So you notice all of these things this year to prepare yourself and to plan and be ready for the next growing season. Because sometimes diseases and insects will take over fairly quickly without us knowing, and that not necessarily not us knowing, but not us realizing how much we've had out there. So daily scouting is going to be very beneficial for you. And then just, being out there and tackling something early in its growing season and early in the life cycle of that particular insect or disease is really going to be important. So a plant disease in the basic terms is going to be a impairment of normal plant function. So this could be due to a continuous irritation by either an environmental factor or through a pathogen. And it's going to be progressive over time. So a disease is not injury. So an injury is going to be a one-time thing that happened and it caused damage to your plant. So for example, frost. And frost can cause significant damage. But frost came in, it kicked back the plant a little bit, caused a little bit of damage, but it's not the disease. It's going to be a one-time thing. Now, a disease could come in on that dead material because some of our diseases are going to be saprophytic, so they're going to be living off of dead materials, but they're not what caused the problem. What caused the problem was that frost. So in order for a disease to develop, there now is called, this is the disease triangle, but there's also now the disease pyramid. So the disease pyramid, you have to have a virulent pathogen or a really strong pathogen. You have to have a favorable environment. You have to have a host that is going to be able to be infected by that particular pathogen. And then you have to have time. So those four factors have to all match perfectly for disease to develop. So the only thing that we really, quote unquote, have control over in gardening is going to be the host. We have no control over the environment. We don't know when it's going to get cold or hot. We don't know when we're going to get rain. We don't really know any of those factors. And then the pathogen is going to be out there year round. There are certain times of the year where it may not be as active as it could be in another time of the year, but it's always out there. It also too has secondary host plants that it can live off of in order to continue its growth and development throughout the season when your host crops are not in the ground. But a host is really going to be something where we have some management. We can select plants that are going to be more tolerable of particular diseases. And we can try to encourage the healthy growth of that plant. We can make sure that we have the right plant in the right place and try our best to keep that as healthy as possible. Our environment, really the way that we can manage the environment is making sure that we're doing good watering practices on our plants. We have the good environmental conditions with the soil sampling and things along those lines. And making sure that, again, all those growth requirements are being met, but we do not have any control over when we're going to get natural rainfall or when our weather patterns, heat and cool weather is going to impact those plants. On this slide is a list of different disease organisms that you may encounter in the growth and development of your garden. So we have fungi, which are typically going to have mushrooms, leaf spots, blights, and wilts. Those are going to be the signs and the symptoms that you're going to see, the symptoms on the plants. Bacteria is going to have some different leaf spots, some blights, cankers, and wilts. Viruses. Now, viruses the particles themselves can only be seen with a microscope, but you can see the damage from different modeling on the leaves. You may find that your plants are stunted or have growth on them that are a little bit distorted in comparison to what would be considered normal growth. And then we also too have nematodes. Nematodes are going to be microscopic worm-like insects. They are not worms, but they are going to be either in the soil or on the leaves. They can be predatory. Some of them are predatory, so they will eat other nematodes, but most of the ones that we're concerned with are going to be parasitic nematodes, and they are going to cause damage to the plant. And they can also too cause stunting as well. Of these that you see listed here, fungi and bacteria, there are management strategies in regards to products available for them to be applied, either systemically, which is going to go through the vascular systems of the plant, or on the surface, on top of the leaves or on the underside of the leaves. The viruses, unfortunately, once the virus gets into your plant, the best thing to do is going to be to pull that plant and reduce it from getting to other plants. And viruses are going to be spread by insects. Oftentimes, they're going to be spread by thrips, but they can also too be spread by other insects that are feeding on an infected plant. Then they move to another plant, and when they go to feed, they are injecting in that virus into the plant. Nematodes, there are no options at this time for a homeowner to manage nematodes. And so I hope over time that may change, but the best thing to do if you do have nematodes, we do have testing that we can send off, and we can send these any sample off to the university for identification if you would like, and we'll send it up to the disease lab. But for nematodes, we do have samples that we can send off, and you can see what type of nematodes you have, just so that you kind of know what type you're dealing with. But in respect to managing those nematodes, the best thing to do is to find another location to garden in if your nematode populations are so high that you're unable to grow your plants. And that's just because there's not any products available for homeowner use that are safe for you to apply them in that particular area. Okay, can anyone tell me what's wrong with this plant? Anybody want to type in what they think is wrong? Is it a bacteria, a fungus, a virus, maybe some nematodes? Anything you want to think about? Nobody? Nobody knows. Okay, that's fine. Too much sun. Okay. That's a good guess. Anybody else? So these plants here, one thing is that, again, you've got to know what type of plant you have. These are actually healthy plants. These are variegated plants that are perfectly healthy. And so for you coming in, if you're getting like some kind of variegated vegetable plant or some specific color, to the unsuspecting person who's coming in, they may think, what is wrong with your vegetable plants? They're not the right color. They should be green, when they are a specific variety that is not supposed to be green. It's supposed to be green with speckles on it, purple speckles on the leaves or something along those lines. So you do want to make sure that you do know what the healthy plant looks like. And when you start seeing some abnormalities, really start diving in as quickly as possible to see, because these could very well look like a virus. They could also be a nutritional problem. So it could be anything, but we have a lot of very variegated plants out now and a lot of new varieties of different plants. So we want to make sure we know what is going on. Oftentimes, whenever we ask you to bring in a sample, we want to see, well, what does the normal growth look like on the plant? And then what is it that is concerning to you? So we can kind of have two comparisons to look at, so we can make sure that when we're going through that diagnosis process, that we have as many tools as we can based on the samples that you've brought in. So this is just the importance of diseases worldwide. These numbers are fairly old. However, I just put them in here just to show that there are issues with diseases, and insects and diseases are right up there with each other of being reasons for losses in the agricultural fields and commodities. We do still have some epidemics that have developed. Sometimes we are more on top of things, I think, now, to try to reduce those into certain areas, to try to stop them from spreading as best that we can. But sometimes we don't have any kind of control. And it does depend on, our weather patterns. If we get a really heavy storm, with the hurricanes and different storms that we have, sometimes that will blow spores in from other places. And we may see a development on our plants. It may not last multiple years, but it may come in for that one growing season and cause some significant damage, because those particular diseases or those particular insects, if we have that, are usually not an issue unless they came in, like I said, with one of those environmental events. But the Irish potato famine is one that a lot of people know about. So is the Bengal famine. But these diseases are still around today. So they haven't left. So Phytophthora infestans is what was a main contributor to potato late blight, and Phytophthora infestans is still causing issues on our potatoes and our tomatoes today. Not as significant as, of course, what happened back when, but we do still have that disease here. And I say that just because it never goes away. So we want to make sure that we're managing it properly, knowing that we can do everything that we can to try to minimize our risk. But if the environmental conditions are going to be favorable for that year, and we'll go into some of those environmental conditions for each disease, we still may see it come up, but hopefully it's not going to be as detrimental to your crop, and you've still been able to get some produce off of it before it comes in. We do have, of course, quality losses that are a big problem, blemishes especially for our fresh production, and giving them away or selling them at farmers market. or even just in the fresh fruit production systems. People aren't going to want to buy blemished fruit. They may think something's wrong with it, even though the fruit itself is perfectly fine. That's just a superficial blemish. Once you peel off the skin, it's perfectly fine to eat. But that doesn't mean that someone's going to pay a specific high dollar for that one that's blemished versus the one right next to it that doesn't have anything. We also do have storage rots, which are a big problem. We tend to see those a lot in our own refrigerators when we've left produce in our refrigerators for a little bit too long. We can also sometimes see them in the stores or the markets when we go to pick them up. But typically it's going to be botrytis that's going to be coming in to take out those populations, but sometimes this happens before it even gets to the market. And then unfortunately, those fruits are not going to be able to be sold. It's very important to kind of be mindful of proper storage of those fruits and trying to minimize that as well. And then of course we have some mycotoxins that can develop on our plants. These can cause very significant problems, not only to livestock, but to individuals who consume them. It can create confusion. It can, depending upon the level that has been consumed and the amount of confusion in the brain, it could also lead to some death of livestock. So those are things that can be a problem, and we do want to make sure that we are watching those if we're going to be feeding these crops to our livestock. We also can have some planting limitations when it comes to planting new plants. We have, of course, Pierce's disease and fire blight, which are two big ones that we're having issues with. Pierce's disease is a significant problem on vinifera grapes. They are actually doing a lot of research on the genetics of the vinifera grapes, and then also to muscadines, because muscadines tend to not have that much damage on Pierce's disease. So they're trying to put a muscadine rootstock in and some of those genetic lines in with some of those vinifera grapes to try to reduce that Pierce's disease on those wine grapes. We also have issues with fire blight. We really have an issue on our pears, but we can see fire blight on our apples as well. We have an orchard in Fayette County, which is ran by the Real Life Center and is on Dogwood Church's property. And they have a really great team of volunteers who come out to manage the property, but they've had some significant issues with fire blight on their apple trees. It happens. It's nothing that they're doing wrong. It's just that it comes in and it can cause some significant damage. And unfortunately, they have to go in there and prune out those really large cankers in their trees. So that way they're not having a source of continuous disease material out there to spread to healthy growth. So this is an example here of the Pierce's disease. You can see that it causes some bronzing and it goes from the tip inward. It also can get on Pierce's disease in general, can also get on other plants, other ornamentals. So some of these diseases that we're talking about today is not only going to impact vegetables, it could also impact ornamental and shade trees as well. And then this is the Pierce's disease. I think many of you may have seen this before. Pierce's disease will cause issues on ornamentals as well as, of course, commercial or backyard varieties that you'd like to grow for fruit production. So basically, it just kind of looks like someone came with a torch and they just went to the tip of the branch and they put the torch on there and it just killed that branch all the way down. And then at the tip of the branch, you'll have it where it's curling over. And it kind of looks like a shepherd's crook or a candy cane. That's kind of a very characteristic visual of the Pierce's disease.
Kim, I just want to interrupt for a second. Is that fire blight is the second one?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I said the wrong thing, didn't I? I apologize. The shepherd's crook is very characteristic of fire blight. Sorry. But this one, like I said before, we do see this a good bit where I am, and I'm making an assumption that you probably see it in your area as well. All right, so when we're trying to determine whether or not disease is going to develop, of course, we've already talked about that disease triangle. We also too have different types of disease cycles, whether they are monocyclic or polycyclic. And then, of course, we have different appearances of the disease itself. So in the images over here, we have some different pieces of this determining disease development. Of course, we've already talked about the host, the pathogen, the environment, and then of course, time. This is the life cycle. When you have determined what kind of disease you have, just like anything that is living, there's going to be a life cycle. It's going to have a period of time when it's going to be there's going to be a time frame where it's going to be the most susceptible or most manageable for any kind of opportunity for you to take care of something. So for example, on insects, you can look to see what stage of their growth is going to be the best time to target it for management practices. It could be when they're young, so you can go out there and hand pick them off and kill them. Or it may be another time, you know, when they're an adult, stop them from reproducing. Maybe there's something else that you can do. But typically for insects, it would be when they're young. For diseases, it's a little bit harder to get in the front lines of it because sometimes you have to see it develop first before you can start doing some management. And depending upon the type of the disease, you may find that you're already a little bit behind. And so you want to look at where in the life cycle of that disease can I effectively have a management strategy put in. And we'll talk about some of those for each one, but the best thing to do is to really reduce the amount of inoculum or the amount of the disease that's out in your landscape. And so that's going to be by good sanitation practices. That's really going to be the best thing that you can do is remove any kind of debris. Don't let fruits drop on the ground. Don't leave things out in the gardens. Those are really going to be a good place there. Having a healthy plant is going to be another one that you can do. We've already talked about that one because like I said before, the disease is out there all the time. But if you can reduce the amount that's on your particular garden space and you can have some healthy plants and you can make sure you're caring for your plants, it's just all going to roll into having a reduction out there. It's not going to be complete eradication. It's not going to be complete you know, I'm never going to have management. It's not going to be like I'm never going to have anything. So just keep that in mind. So the goal is to keep that pathogen down to a level where you can still have really good fruits and vegetables, but that, you know, you're still managing it, you know, properly. There are, of course, some products that you could choose to use. That's 100% up to you, but there are very specific timeframes within the growth and the development of the plant as to when those products would need to be applied. And so you would need to make sure that the timing of those particular products is correct for the timing of that plant and the disease problem that you could be having. If you look down here in this bottom photo, this just kind of shows some images of the symptoms. So a symptom is going to be a visual representation that something is wrong with your plant. So just like us, when we get sick, we have symptoms. We may have a cough, we may have a sore throat, something along those lines. Those are symptoms. But it doesn't tell you what kind of issue you have. You could just be having a cold. You could have the flu. You could have got some kind of allergy. So having a cough isn't really a clear indicator of, well, you have a cough, so we automatically know you have this problem. So those signs are really going to be what tells us what's going on. So a sign is going to be down here in this other photo, which is a visual representation of the spore itself that's causing the disease. And our spores are very characteristic to each disease. So again, if you are able to bring in a sample and they can look at it under the microscope, they can see that, oh, look, here's these spores. This is Alternaria. This is what's causing your problem. If they're not able to look at the symptoms to tell what that is. Now, Alternaria can be a saprophytic plant disease as well. So it can cause damage, but it can also be feeding off dead plant material. So that one's can be a little tricky, but there's some really good ways to determine specifically which one that is. This is just a larger view of the disease cycle. You can see that there is a primary infection cycle and then there's secondary infection cycles. Honestly, the most that we see is going to be in the primary infection cycle, and it's going to be of asexual spores. When you start having sexual spores produced from the disease, it's going to have some genetic recombination happening, which is where we start to get those new lines or new strains of that disease that may be more tolerant to any kind of management strategies that we've implemented in. So a lot of what happens is going to be on those asexual spores. But again, if we do have the opportunity for that genetic recombination to happen, then we will see that we have some of those concerns with breakdown and going in and overcoming resistance and things along those lines on the plant. So again, this is the symptom. This is the expression of disease on the surface of the plants. And then that sign is going to be specifically what pathogen is present that's actually causing those spots on the plant. So can anyone tell me if these are symptoms or signs? These are 3 different plant diseases.
Symptoms.
Yeah, you're right. So these are symptoms. These are just a visual representation that, hey, look, something is going on with the plant and I need to kind of investigate a little bit further. As you move into this plant here, so on this particular disease, this one is, if you look into those spores, you'll see there's tiny little black dots in the center of each one of these little gray areas. And if you touch it, it's like a sticky substance. So you can actually pick that up and put it on a slide. And you look at it under the microscope, and this is actually Entomosporium leaf spot. So this is actually what's causing this disease. And this is a big problem on our Indian hawthorns. We have some varieties that will completely lose their leaves and then they'll put new leaves out. And so it's called Entomosporium leaf spot because of the way that the spores are shaped. They kind of look like little insects. They have a head, they have little legs, they have a little tail, a little body. So they named it Entomosporium leaf spot. But those spores are very characteristic. And so it's very nice whenever we're able to pull those off of a plant sample, because it's very easy for us to say, yes, this is what it is. And then we can start giving you some management strategies. We can provide you with some cultural strategies as well to help either in the current season or if you see it, you can move forward for the next season and have some of those resources available. Okay, so let's go through some of these different diseases that we'll see. And honestly, the majority of the slides that you're going to see tonight are going to be issues with tomatoes, because tomatoes get a lot of diseases. And but tomatoes are one of those that everybody wants to grow, and they can grow well here. They just tend to get some issues. So this is early blight. It's caused by Alternaria, and it is a fungal disease, and it's going to overwinter in crop debris. So you can see here that on each of these slides, as I move forward, I'll give you a little bit of information about the disease and then give you some management strategies that you can maybe think about if you did have this one pop up in the previous growing season, so you can maybe reduce it. This disease on the leaves, they have very unique growth patterns of their spores or their looks on the leaves. They grow in concentric rings, and it kind of looks like if you've ever cut down a tree before and you see all the growth rings on the tree. It's kind of what they look like here on the leaves. This is what the spores look like under the microscope. Again, this is Alternaria, and it can get on tomatoes and potatoes. So with disease management, we recommend that you do crop rotation, and crop rotation is going to help you with reducing the buildup of disease in the soil. And but that's going to be based on the plant families. So for example, like tomato and potato, you don't want to put tomatoes in the same area with potatoes the next year. And so because they can get some of the same issues. And so you're kind of building it up in the soil for that perfect storm to come in and kind of take down a crop. So we want to try to do that as well. Sanitation, again, is going to be a big one for management of these diseases. Don't let the name, early blight can come in early in the season, and it can come in late in the season. So don't let the name, make you think, oh, it's only going to come early in the season and it's going to go away. It typically will come in on the lower leaves of the tomato plant, and then through rain splash or through watering, it will jump itself up to the other portions of the leaves. Because it's going to be on the lower portion of the leaves, you can, when you start seeing it develop, you can remove that bottom portion of the leaf with the disease on it, so that you're reducing the spread of splash from those spores from leaf to leaf. Any kind of watering that you do, please make sure that you're doing drip style watering or watering to the base of the plant. You should never do overhead watering on your plants in general. You're having a lot of evaporation happening with that, and it's not really getting down to where the plant's going to need it, which is going to be to uptake it through its roots. And you'll also find out that you may be keeping your foliage too wet, and plant diseases need warm days, cool nights, and wet weather. So they need those three things in order to initiate infection. And so if we have warm days and cool nights, but we're not wet, then you'll find that you may not have as much develop. But if you go out there and overhead water, and then you've created a wet environment, now it's got everything it needs for some infection. So those are some ways that you can do some reduction in creating an environment for them that may produce disease. This is powdery mildew on cucurbits. It kind of looks like someone went out there with some baby powder and just dumped some powder on the surface of the leaves. It will overwinter on other hosts and weeds. It is spread by wind. It is hydrophobic, so it does not like water. So some people may go out and spray their plants down with water to get the powdery mildew off, because it doesn't like water. So it's going to be on the upper surface of the leaf, because on the lower surface of the leaf, it's going to be a little bit cooler, and you may find a little bit more moisture may collect under there, just because of the normal processes of the plant. However, there's another disease that really loves water. And so you may find that by managing this problem, you may find that you have something else coming in as well. And we'll show you that one in a minute. But this is going to be primarily, powdery mildew can get on a lot of things, but it gets on cucurbits because of the size of the leaves of cucurbits, and good air movement moving through can sometimes be difficult. And so that's why I said it kind of likes to be on the surface. And so you want to make sure that you're opening up that canopy as best you can, getting good air movement to move through there, which is going to be something that's going to help with powdery mildew and the other one that I'm going to tell you in a minute. And you want to just be careful about some of these other cultural practices, and that you're following those as well. Verticillium wilt on tomatoes. This one is a fungal disease, and it is a soil-borne pathogen. The spores are going to spread to neighboring hosts by an infected plant. So for this one, if you notice it happening, try to get it out as quickly as you can to stop it from going down the row. It does have, though, a very large host range. So if you're planning on doing a fall garden, and you had a summer garden, and you may have had this with some of your tomatoes or your peppers, be careful, because it can cause damage on your cabbages as well. And so in your radishes. So you just want to be careful that you're keeping that in mind if you're planning on doing that. There are going to be some resistant crops to this. So if you have an area and you're unfortunately not able to grow in that area anymore because of verticillium wilt, you may want to try some of these resistant crops, so you can still get a produce off of that plot of land or that area that you have in the space, but it may just not be those traditional vegetable plants that maybe people would like, but there are still some that you can use there. Late blight on tomato is caused by Phytophthora infestans. This is the one that caused the Irish potato or contributed to the Irish potato famine. It is a fungal-like disease. It does like wet and moist soils. So it can spread very quickly. It will run like rampant through a field if the environmental conditions are correct. We have had that happen before where someone has come in and they had this disease, and within about 24, 48 hours, the entire row of their crop was completely destroyed by it. And they had to take it out and burn it. And, they didn't have any tomatoes that year. And it's very unfortunate, but it can spread very quickly, very quickly. Of course, we do have some more tolerant cultivars. There are not going to be any that are completely resistant to it, but we do have some that are tolerant. And then, of course, that crop rotation and then really good sanitation. The one thing, too, is to try to avoid wet and moist soils. Again, our clay soils here will collect water, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when we do have dry spells and our plants do have access to water, but we do want to make sure that we have properly prepared that site. We've added in any kind of composting material or anything along those lines that will allow us to allow that water to move through as quickly as possible for those plants. And so that way we're not having too much water just sitting in an area, because that can lead to some other issues as well. So this is downy mildew. Downy mildew is it's not the same as powdery mildew, but it's whereas powdery mildew is on the upper surface of the leaf and it looks like someone dumped some white powder out on it, downy mildew is on the underside of the leaf, and it loves water, and it loves to be up underneath the leaf, and it typically has a gray mycelium on the underside of the leaf. And on the upper surface, though, this can look like a nutrient deficiency, or it could look like something is going on, an insect could be, or you may think it's a virus. So there's so many different things that it can look like or be similar to, but it's actually going to be downy mildew. So if you turn that leaf over, you'll see some gray mycelium, and that's what's actually causing some of that damage there. So this one, again, is just those good cultural practices, and we do have some cultivars that may be a little bit more tolerant to it, but given the right environmental conditions, it can continue to take over and thrive on those plants. We have bacterial spot on tomatoes. This is caused by two different types of bacteria. And, you may have seen some of this before on your tomatoes. In order for us to look at it under the microscope, it's kind of hard for us to do that because we don't have plates where we can streak out the bacteria. Up in Athens, they do, so they can give you some much more specific information if needed. But we can watch for bacterial streaming on our plants, which is actually kind of really cool. And I'll show a photo of that hopefully here in a minute. But we can look at that. And there are some very characteristic things with some bacteria. Typically, around the spot will be a yellow halo. That is a good indicator that this may be a bacteria instead of a fungus. Fungus will have some kind of structure or some kind of spore either on the inside of the spot on the leaf or on the underside of the leaf, depending upon that one. But bacteria will typically have a spot, and then it'll have a yellow halo that runs around it. Now, that doesn't hold true for every single thing, but it is, it does help to kind of move you towards one or the other as you're starting to identify and move through. So this is bacterial wilt. The tomato is going to be the most susceptible crop, and it can survive in the soil for an extended period of time, unfortunately. But it can attack anything else as well. It has over 200 species that can be host as well. So this plant is really cool, or this disease is really cool just because it will do the bacterial streaming like you see here. So these little bands that kind of look like little rubber bands, that's bacteria that has built up in that plant. So whenever we suspect it may be bacteria wilt, we will take a sample of it. Someone has brought in a sample to us, and we'll cut it and we'll put it in water, and the bacteria will start to ooze out of that plant material and into the water. And it's really kind of cool just to kind of watch it do it. But basically what happens is the bacteria will clog up all of the vascular tissues in the plant. So it'll basically stop the water and nutrients from going up to the top of the plant, which causes the wilt. And then we have tomato spotted wilt virus. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. This is a virus that is going to be spread via thrips, and down in the lower picture here, this is what a thrips looks like. It always has an S on the end. It's never a thrip. It's always thrips. But they are very small, very, very small. And basically they will uptake the disease, and the virus will replicate in its mouth part. And every time they go in to feed off of the plant, they're injecting in that virus into the plant. So you'll see this is very characteristic of tomato spotted wilt. It looks kind of cool to me, but you may not feel that way. But it can cause some issues with stunting, and it can reduce the amount of tomatoes that will be produced. And so, there are going to be tomato spotted wilt is a big one. And we do have some varieties of cultivars that are more tolerant to it. And then, of course, managing the vector is going to be the only other thing that you can do. But as far as something that you can put out there to stop the virus, unfortunately, once it gets into the plant, it's already moving, and it's already moving through that plant. And some plants are kind of tricky. Some plants will show that they have tomato spotted wilt virus, and some plants will be asymptomatic, so they'll never show they have it. And so it's just one of those things of growing plants, I guess. So then we also too have blossom end rot, which a lot of people think is a disease, but it's not. The blossom end rot is a nutritional deficiency, and it's actually going to be a combination between calcium and water. So it's not just calcium, it's a water, inconsistent watering, that is going to be something that will also to contribute to it. It will typically be a problem on the first few clusters of tomatoes that come onto the plant. Now, once it gets past the first 2 or 3 clusters, if you start continuously noticing it, then you may want to start doing some other things, maybe putting down some kind of supplement, or you definitely should be watching your water in general, just to make sure that the plants are getting consistent water at the right amount and consistently throughout the day. We would really recommend that you get your soil tested prior to planting, because there's just so many other things that you can do without having to worry about a plant and the root system being in your way while you're trying to manage all of that. And that way it will really help you with just some overall nutritional issues as you're moving forward in the growing season. All right, so with any kind of disease, identification is key. We want to make sure that you are able to manage these issues as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And whatever way that you want to manage it is 100% up to you. But we do want to help you to make sure that whatever strategies we have available and that you are wanting to do, we can mix those together and you can be successful in your garden. So please bring in samples to your local extension office so that way they can look at things. If you still have some of these plants out in your landscape, some people have already started to clean out their gardens, and some people are waiting until the first frost. Everyone's a little bit different. But if you're already having some of these issues, you can bring them into the office. We can help you with identification, and then that way you know what they look like in the physical form. You can take a photo of it on your phone. You can put it in your notebook for record keeping purposes, just so that way when it comes back again, because I'll be honest with you, it will come back again the next year. You will be able to know, okay, this is what I have. This is what I did last year for it. And, this was helpful or this wasn't helpful. Let me contact my extension office to see if there's anything new that has come out. So that way I can be on top of it and it won't continue to be a significant issue. We also too recommend that you do get out in your gardens. People use gardens for so many different things. It's such a relaxing thing for you to get out there and, walk through your garden, look at your plants. Some people talk to their plants. It's a great opportunity for you just to be outside and in nature. So we do encourage you to be out and to look at your gardens. The quicker that you can identify something's going on, the quicker you're going to be able to start that process of management and in whichever method you choose to use. I would recommend too that you do come to your extension offices for recommendations. There are many recommendations that are given in many different platforms, and whether they work or not, we can't validate whether they do or not. So you could definitely try those things if you'd like to, but if you want something that has been researched and has gone through many different trials in the greenhouses that our researchers have gone through, and something that we have shown that is going to be something that will help you, then we do recommend that you come to us so that we can help you out with that. Okay. We do want to make sure that you do keep a journal, and journaling is just a really great way to help you for the next growing season. And as you already saw on all of the slides, sanitation is going to be number one. It really does help with diseases. It helps with insects as well, but it really does help with diseases because you are reducing the amount of disease spores that are right there on your property. And that doesn't mean that you'll never have to potentially use something, some sort of product, or go out there and pinch off the leaves, or change your watering practices, or, something along those lines. But keeping it out of your garden is really going to be very helpful. And you can really get a good handle on that. And it doesn't take that long. I remember walking through a garden one time, and it was a great garden, but they would put all of their produce right there in the row. And so it never really got out of the field. And so we want it to be out of the field. Get rid of it. If it can be composted, make sure your compost pile is actively working and is being used appropriately so that it can break down. Some of our disease plants, though, I would not put in a composted pile. And that's just because of their availability to continue to overwinter on different crops and things along those lines. And so you may just want to not put them in your compost pile, but get them off of your property, put them in a bag, discard of them like you would normally do any other kind of yard waste. So that way it can be out of your field. Okay. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. You are always welcome again we have wonderful publications on our extension page. You can go to extension.uga.edu and type in many different vegetable crops that you may be wanting to grow, and they'll tell you how to grow them, what are some potential concerns that could come about from growing them, so that way you can really get a good idea of what to look for and how to plan your space. So I would highly encourage you to do that, and go to your local offices for their help as well, and bringing in those samples, either soil samples or plant samples, whatever you can, so that way we can help you with some of those issues you may be having. Okay, so with that, Gabrielle and Justin, I'm done. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, I appreciate everyone for staying on and listening to me talk about diseases. And just know that these are plant diseases. Okay, these are they don't transfer over. So they are only for plants, and we can manage them, but we want to do them as effectively as possible.
Thank you, Kim. Really appreciate that presentation. A lot of information there. And you actually answered a couple of my questions at the end. I was going to ask, what's the best method to discard of any diseased plant material? And I heard you mention burning earlier, and then just now discarding of them similarly to, waste in the household. So that's definitely beneficial. You don't want to put that in your compost. So I heard on that. And my second question was, hopefully nobody judges me, but I generally, like, if I see, some decay or a pest is eating something on my crop, I'll just cut it off and eat the parts that are not affected.
Yep.
Um,
And that's
so-
perfectly fine to do that. As long as it's not rotted, you can smell it as long as it doesn't have an off odor to it. There's no reason why you can't eat it. And I think, and that's a lot of people that, oh, it's got something wrong with it, I have to throw it away. Just cut out the bad part. And as long as it smells fine and it tastes fine, there should be no reason why you can't eat it. These are plant diseases. And so I'll tell you, I have eaten probably plenty of tomato spotted wilt virus tomatoes, and I'm pretty sure all of you have too. And you didn't know it, but, and we don't have tomato spotted wilt virus, right? So these are plants issues. When we have issues with recalls, that's because a human pathogen has somehow got over into the plants and it could have impacted those plants. Okay. So that's why they do those recalls, because those are pathogens that could cause damage to us if we were to consume them. But as long as, I've done that plenty. I cut off the blossom end rot part and everything else smells fine to me. So I'll chip it up and put it in a salad or something else. The other thing too is to, like I said, I've seen people just drop it right on the ground. So take a bucket with you and collect those. And then again, like I said, you can put them in your compost pile depending upon what the problem is. And if it is an actual significant disease or something that can overwinter or stay on the infected crop material, then of course you're going to want to do a little bit different procedure for those. As far as, I had another question in here, as far as the soil testing. So soil testing is only going to do the minerals and nutrients in the soil. So it's going to do the pH of the soil, and it's going to do those basic needs that plants are going to need. Are that we have multiple different tests. So you can really choose what kind of test you want and what results you're looking for. But we don't have a test that's going to test for soil pathogens or diseases in the soil. Oftentimes, where those tests are going to come from is once they have developed on your plant. And so when you bring in the plant, if we tell you, hey, look, you have tomato spotted wilt virus, or you have alternaria, or you have late blight, something like that, it's because it's showing symptoms on the physical plant itself. And then that's how you'll know you have it. So then the next growing season, you may select new varieties that are more tolerant to that, because unfortunately, you're going to have it. It may not be as I've already said before. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom either. I'm just being realistic of, you are going to potentially have that next year. So go ahead and prepare yourself to select a cultivar that, or a variety of, tomato that may be more tolerant to it. That way, you are prepared to have a planting, and you may have to change some of those environmental practices that you've done, your watering practices, your fertilization practices, those sorts of things, in order to kind of combat that one. But our soil reports are only going to test for the minerals and nutrients in the soil, and then they'll give you specific from our labs anyway. They'll give you specific recommendations on what to do, specific and pertaining to the plants that you're wanting to grow there. So if you're wanting to grow a vegetable garden, they'll say, well, this is what your soil pH is reading now. This is what it needs to be. These are our recommendations to get it up to what it needs to be. And this is also to a management cycle for fertilization. You need to fertilize, with a 10-10-10 every, these months. And that way they'll give you a management strategy as well for nutrition purposes. And if you don't want to use conventional style fertilizers and you want to use more natural style fertilizers, we can convert those soil reports into those for you. So, how much blood meal are you going to need? How much are you going to need of these composted materials? So that way you can, or these other manures, so that way you can kind of have some of those ratios be in comparison to that soil report.
And I wanted to mention briefly that in Fulton County, plant disease samples, where you're bringing in an infected plant sample and you want to find out what pathogen it is, for commercial growers, those samples are free of charge. So just bring them to the office, you'll fill out some paperwork, and then our plant pathologist will look at them in Athens. For residents or non-commercial growers, they're going to be $10 per sample. So just know that in Fulton.
Yep. And that's if you want to send it off to Athens. If you're able to bring it in the office and they can identify it in the office, then there's no charge for us to do that. But if it's something that's wiped out your entire field, we're going to send it off because we want you to have that breakdown from one of our specialists who've ran many different tests on it. And in our offices, we don't have access to all the different materials that they do in Athens to run all those different tests on different plants. And so it's 100% up to you as to if you want to send it off to Athens or if you'd like for us to look at it as well. There's another question about our appointments required to bring in soil samples to Athens. So in my office in Fayette, and I'll let Gabrielle and James talk about in Fulton because it may be a little bit different process. We are open to the public. So in Fayette, you bring your soil sample to our office. We are open from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. We take the sample and we take your payment, and then we ship it off to Athens for you. So the soil samples we will ship off for you. The plant samples we will ship off for you as well. If you're a homeowner, it's $10 plus shipping. If you're a commercial grower, it is free, but we do charge you shipping to get it up to Athens. So everybody's a little different as to what they do, but that's how we do it in Fayette. And so there is no appointment per se for a soil sample. Now, if you want to have someone come out to look at your field, if you want to have a one-on-one conversation, then at that point we may want to set up an appointment just because we're kind of in and out all the time. And so we just want to make sure that we don't miss you. But as far as the testing services, you can do that anytime. And I'll let Gabrielle and James talk about Fulton specific because it may be a little bit different. I'm not sure.
So in Fulton, since we have so many offices, we have sort of different policies. At our headquarters office in East Point, you will want to make an appointment to bring in any type of sample. And you can just call our main number that's on our website. The Sandy Springs office, you don't need an appointment, but it's just me and Norlethia in the office right now, and we're kind of in and out. So you may want to just contact one of us to make sure that we're going to be there that day. If you're bringing in a soil sample, we have a drop box outside that you can drop it off, fill out your paperwork, and just leave it there. For a plant sample, where it'll need to stay cold, you might want to just make sure that we're going to be in the office. But for the East Point office, you will need to call them and make an appointment.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for the information shared. Thank you so much, everyone who's joined, for the questions and your attention. I'm going to, in your chat here, you see, oops.